Hi, I'm Rashonda Kate. This is Reading with Rashonda, and we are reading Running a Thousand Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft. We are still in part one. This is video 7. I was making random garbled statements about Missouri as a slave state last time we were reading. So let's dive in right now where we are. But the Dred Scott decision is the crowning act of infamous Yankee legislation. In the Supreme Court, the highest tribunal of the Republic, composed of nine Judge Jeffries, chosen both from the free and slave states, has decided that no colored person or persons of African extraction can ever become a citizen of the United States or have any rights which white men are bound to respect. That is to say, in the opinion of this court, trying to turn the page. Let me turn the page. That is to say, in the opinion of this court, robbery, rape, and murder are not crimes when committed by a white upon a colored person. Judges who will sneak from their high and honorable position down to the lowest depths of human depravity and scrape up a decision like this are wholly unworthy the confidence of any people. I believe such men would, if they had the power and were it to their temporal interest, sell their country's independence and barter away every man's birthright for a mess of pottage. Well may Thomas Campbell say, "United States, your banner wears two emblems, one of fame, alas, the other that it bears reminds us of your shame. The white man's liberty in types stands blazoned by your stars, but what's the meaning of your stripes? They mean your Negro scars." When the time had arrived for us to start, we blew out the lights, knelt down, and prayed to our Heavenly Father mercifully to assist us, as He did His people of old, to escape from cruel bondage, and we shall ever feel that God heard and answered our prayer. Had we not been sustained by a kind, and I sometimes think special providence, we could never have overcome the mountainous difficulties which I am now about to describe. After this we rose and stood for a few moments in breathless silence. We were afraid that someone might have been about the cottage listening and watching our movements. So I took my wife by the hand, stepped softly to the door, raised the latch, drew it open, and peeped out. Though there were trees all around the house, yet the foliage scarcely moved. In fact, everything appeared to be as still as death. I then whispered to my wife, "Come, my dear, let us make a desperate leap for liberty." But poor thing, she shrank back in a state of trepidation. I turned and asked what was the matter. She made no reply, but burst into violent sobs and threw her head upon my breast. This appeared to touch my very heart. It caused me to enter into her feelings more fully than ever. We both saw the many mountainous difficulties that rose one after the other before our view, and knew far too well what our sad fate would have been were we caught and forced back into our slavish den. Therefore, on my wife's fully realizing the solemn fact that we had to take our lives, as it were, in our hands, and contest every inch of the 1,000 miles of slave territory over which we had to pass, it made her heart almost sink within her, and had I known then at that time, I would have repeated the following and had I known them at that time, I would have repeated the following encouraging lines, which may not be out of place here. "The hill though high, I covet to ascend, the difficulty will not me offend, for I perceive the way to life lies here. Come, pluck up heart, let's neither faint nor fear. Better though difficult the right way to go, than wrong though easy, where the end is woe." So various times in this piece, in our Nig, in Clotel, the authors have quoted other authors, they've quoted poetry, they've quoted speeches, and that just speaks to me about the power of the written word and its enduring legacy. Poetry's not going to fail you. You may not remember all of it, but you can find it if it's written down, if you can read it, if you can understand it. And I am super passionate about literacy. I'm finding this out more and more about myself because the written word is so powerful. And if we don't understand how to read beyond the words to the meanings and the feelings and let those things impact us and change our lives, we're losing the power of literature. And I don't want us to do that. So I'm reading these books. Here we go. However, the sobbing was soon over, and after a few moments of silent prayer, she recovered her self-possession and said, "Come, William, it is getting late, so now let us venture upon our perilous journey." We then opened the door and stepped as softly out as moonlight upon the water. I locked the door with my own key, which I now have before me, and tiptoed across the yard into the street. I say tiptoed because we were like persons near a tottering avalanche, afraid to move or even breathe freely for fear the sleeping tyrants should be aroused and come down upon us with double vengeance for daring to attempt to escape in the manner which we contemplated. We shook hands, said farewell, and started in different directions for the railway station. I took the nearest possible way to the train for fear I should be recognized by someone, and got into the Negro car in which I knew I should have to ride. But my master, as I will now call my wife, took a longer way round and only arrived there with the bulk of the passengers. He obtained a ticket for himself and one for his slave to Savannah, the first port, which was about 200 miles off. My master then had the luggage stowed away and stepped into one of the best carriages. Oh! The courage and ferocity to be a slave woman dressed up as a man with your arm in a sling, green spectacles on, this full kerchief thing all around your face, to strut into the train station and start ordering around people with all of the privilege of white men attendant that was available in 1848, which, let me say, was a lot. She struts in. She's like, "Yeah, I'm getting this ticket. I'm getting some passage for my slave. You over there, take my luggage. And what's the best seat that I can have? That is the one I'm purchasing with me and my white male self." Ha! Ooh, all right. But just before the train moved off, I peeped through the window, and to my great astonishment, I saw the cabinet maker with whom I had worked so long on the platform. Oh, no. He stepped up to the ticket seller and asked some questions, and then commenced looking rapidly through the passengers and into the carriages. Fully believing that we were caught, I shrank into a corner, turned my face from the door, and expected in a moment to be dragged out. The cabinet maker looked into my master's carriage, but did not know him in his new attire, and, as God would have it, before he reached mine, the bell rang and the train moved off. Whew! I have heard since that the cabinet maker had a presentiment that we were about to make tracks for parts unknown, but not seeing me, his suspicions vanished until he received the startling intelligence that we had arrived safely in a free state. As soon as the train had left the platform, my master looked round in the carriage and was terror-stricken to find a Mr. Cray, an old friend of my wife's master, who dined with the family the day before and knew my wife from childhood, sitting on the same seat. The doors of the American railway carriages are at the ends. The passengers walk up the aisle and take seats on either side, and as my master was engaged in looking out of the window, he did not see who came in. My master's first impression after seeing Mr. Cray was that he was there for the purpose of securing him. However, my master thought it was not wise to give any information respecting himself, and for fear that Mr. Cray might draw him into a conversation and recognize his voice, my master resolved to feign deafness as the only means of self-defense. And this is how you fight for freedom. All right, I'm going to just pretend like I'm deaf. How do you pretend you're deaf? I don't know. How do you pretend you can't hear everything that's going on around you? How do you pretend to not notice a little bit over here, or to hear something startling and look over to it? What presence of mind do you have to pretend that you can't hear anything happening around you? That's got to be a really, really difficult thing to do. but she did it. After a little while, Mr. Cray said to my master, "It is a very fine morning, sir." The latter took no notice, but kept looking out of the window. Mr. Cray soon repeated this remark in a little louder tone, but my master remained as before. This indifference attracted the attention of the passengers near, one of whom laughed out. This, I suppose, annoyed the old gentleman, so he said, "I will make him hear." "How you gonna make somebody hear? If they can't hear, I mean, she could hear, but how you gonna make somebody who can't hear hear? You can't. What are you doing?" And in a loud tone of voice repeated, "It is a very fine morning, sir." Let me pause here for a moment. The privilege here is astounding. Okay, so she was pretending she was deaf. But she could have just been ignoring him. But this man was like, "No, you don't get to ignore me. I have said good morning to you. It is a nice day. And you are going to respond to me and have a polite conversation with me." What amount of privilege is that you demand that somebody respond to you? That you feel like you cannot be ignored and that people have to take your trivialities? It's a triviality. I mean, it's a politeness, right? Good morning, it's a nice day, but it's a triviality. There's nothing important about that except for the fact that this man felt that he was due somebody responding to his triviality because heaven forbid somebody ignore him. That is a lot of privilege right there. And I'm going to keep the rest of what I'm thinking to myself. All right, so he got loud. This, I suppose, annoyed the old gentleman. So he said, "I will make him hear." And in a loud tone of voice repeated, "It is a very fine morning, sir." My master turned his head and with a polite bow said yes, and commenced looking out of the window again. One of the gentlemen remarked that it was a very great deprivation to be deaf. "Yes," replied Mr. Cray, "and I shall not trouble that fellow any more." This enabled my master to breathe a little easier and to feel that Mr. Cray was not his pursuer after all. Okay, so acknowledging that there are an array of hearing impairments and that some people can't hear conversational tones but can hear loud tones and can reply to them. But this gentleman on this train decided the only way deafness can happen or the only way a hearing impairment can happen is where you can't hear low sounds but you can hear loud sounds. That is what satisfied this person. So he was like, "Not only am I exercising my privilege in that I'm going to make you hear, you will respond to my triviality." He also was saying there's only one right way to have a hearing impairment, and that's so you don't hear low sounds, but you hear big ones. And because you have acted acceptably in the way I have determined life should move forward and how your hearing impairment works, then you're okay. All right, are we at a good stopping space? Let me see. Yeah, I think we'll just stop here. I've rambled on. I've got worked up. Anyway, I'm Rashonda Cade. We're reading Running 1,000 Miles for Freedom by William and Ellen Craft, and this is Reading with Rashonda.